Did you ever sit down to a match of Magic and your opponent does this? Or maybe this? Be careful, they might be getting an unfair advantage over you. Getting mana screwed or flooding out is one of the least enjoyable moments that you can have in a match of Magic. So naturally, people are trying to find ways to avoid that. The two examples I've just shown belong to these attempts. The first one is called mana weaving. This is where you prepare your deck in such a way that lands and spells are evenly distributed across your entire deck. The other example is called pile shuffling, but that name is a little bit misleading. It's actually not shuffling. So for the rest of the video, I'm gonna call it pile stacking. Both methods are used by players to get rid of clumps of lands in their deck. And the techniques work, to such an extent that if you're going up against one of these decks with a properly randomized deck, you are at a disadvantage. But neither of these techniques are illegal. How is that possible? So let's look at the rules. The rules specifically mention pile stacking and mana weaving. Any manipulation, weaving or stacking prior to randomization is acceptable as long as the deck is thoroughly shuffled afterwards. Intentionally stacking a deck with the intent to gain an advantage is defined as cheating. We're gonna come back to this. So, how much of an advantage does it actually give you? So in order to get a feeling for that, let's devise a little experiment. What I have here is a Magic deck. And the spells are yellow sleeves and the lands are in black sleeves. So if we thoroughly shuffle, we should be able to see what the distribution looks like. In literature you can find that performing 7 riffle shuffles with the deck is enough to fully randomize it. So let's do this. This is one example of a fully randomized deck. You have some clumps of spells, you have some clumps of lands, you have single spells, you have single lands, something like this. Let's define some terminology. What does fully randomized actually mean? A fully randomized deck holds no information about the whereabouts of any card. So any previous knowledge about the deck, about the position of lands or a specific spell, is completely lost. So here's where we come across the first problem with pile stacking and mana weaving. By mana weaving and pile stacking, you're imposing an order on your deck. And according to the rules, your next job now is to completely destroy that order. So why do it in the first place? You're just wasting time. Mana weaving and pile stacking takes a lot longer than riffle shuffling or mesh shuffling. Mesh shuffling being where you split the deck in half and then interweave those two halves into each other. Now let's look at a mana weave deck. In order to make this pattern extra visible, I've chosen a slightly unrealistic deck of 14 lands and 26 spells. So I'm gonna go 1 land, 2 spells, 1 land, 2 spells, and so on. This is what the pattern for a mana weave deck looks like. If your opponent were to present a deck like this to you, according to the rules, it would be cheating, because this is not randomized. Also, if they present this deck to you and you just cut, it doesn't really change anything. Such a prevalent pattern will of course survive the process of cutting. So cutting here literally does not cut it. As we can see here. We can make that pattern visible by just reversing it. So let's pile stack this in 3 piles. Because of this pattern, we absolutely would expect that all lands would end up in the same pile. If we put the 3 piles on top of each other, the pattern is clearly revealed. So we have seen that pile stacking and mana weaving introduces an order to the deck and therefore is not considered randomization of the deck. But what if our opponent shuffled the deck after mana weaving? Are we in the clear? Let's check it out. So here we have the Mana Weave deck, and now we're gonna perform a Riffle Shuffle. We have Riffle Shuffled the deck once after Mana Weaving. Let's see if the pattern is gone. Let's see if we can still recognize the pattern. So this is what the deck looks like after Mana Weaving, then one Riffle Shuffle, and then pile stacking. Well, it looks like the lands are still concentrated in one particular area, but I think this is where intuition leaves us, and we have to turn to computation. So, unfortunately, our puny human minds are not very well equipped to deal with statistical processes and to intuit them by just looking at them. So we need a little bit more of an objective measurement. And simulations can help with that. I want to preface this section by saying that I've never done a video like this before, so I was pretty nervous putting data out there in the world. So a special thank you goes out to Serkovitz, who was kind enough to sacrifice a little bit of his time to discuss these things with me, and he gave great input on what I could check and how I could present these things. And so thank you, Serkovitz. Very much appreciated. So I created a little Python routine. As this is computation, we can now go with an actually realistic deck of 40 cards total with 16 lands and 24 spells. You can see a representation of this right here. We have the first 9 entries, lands, then 2 spells, land, 2 spells, land, 2 spells, and so on. And these numbers now serve as the input for our shuffle algorithm. So we have a riffle shuffle algorithm that also inserts a little bit of randomness. And we can ask this algorithm to shuffle our deck n times. And the result of the shuffling is given to us, again, as these numbers, 0s and 1s, after n shuffling. As we're dealing with a statistical process, each data point is represented by 10,000 repetitions of the same thing, and then averaging over them. And after we get this shuffled deck, we can now perform different operations. For example, we can check what does the average starting hand of a randomized deck look like. And you can see this here. We have the number of lands in hand and the likelihood of that occurring. We can see that in a properly randomized deck, we usually get 2, 3, or 4 lands. This is the majority. But about 10% of the time we get 1 land, 5% of the time we get 5 lands, and there are some outliers at 0, 6, and 7. How does the distribution look like for a Mana Weave deck? Well, it should come as no surprise that for a Mana Weave deck without shuffling, you always get 3 lands in your opening hands. This is of course if you Mana Weave 1 land, 2 spells, 1 land, 2 spells, and so on. So the main question now is, how long does it take in order for this distribution become the properly randomized distribution? How many riffle shuffles does it take? So we got our 0 shuffles. If we riffle shuffle once, then we still have the majority of our openings having 3 lands, with a few at 2 and 4 lands. But this is still a far cry away from the distribution that we are looking at with a properly randomized deck. Okay, let's continue. 2 shuffles. Okay, we are starting to get some 1-landers, we're starting to get some 5-landers. Still the majority, the vast majority is 2, 3, or 4 lands. 3 shuffles, 4 shuffles. I mean, this is somewhat close. And I would say that at about 5 shuffles, the distributions are so similar that you could say that there is no inherent advantage for the Mana Weave deck. And this, of course, not only has ramifications on the times you are getting flooded or you're getting mana screwed, it also has huge implications on your mulligan rate. Let's assume that we mulligan all hands with 0, 1, 5, 6, or 7 lands, and only keep 2, 3, or 4. This is, of course, a little bit of an oversimplification, but for the scope of this video, I think this is a reasonable assumption. So, let's check how many mulligans will we need to take. So let's start with the fully randomized deck again. This is how many lands are in an opening hand for the fully randomized deck. And if we now sum up the percentages for 0, 1, 5, 6, and 7, we get that there is a mulligan rate of about 20%. So you are more or less expected to mulligan 20% of your hands. Note, of course, that this is best of 3 on Arena or live play. No hand smoother, no nothing. This is how often you can expect to mulligan in a best of 3 game. And I'm pleasantly surprised that this mulligan rate pretty much agrees with the data that is available from 17 lands. In one of his seminars, Serkovitz showed a mulligan rate of about 20% in best of 3. So what are the mulligan rates for the Mana Weave deck? Here on this axis we see the mulligan rate, and this black line are these 20% that we theoretically expect for a properly randomized deck. The red bars here now indicate the mulligan rate for the Mana Weaved deck. At 0 and 1 we see that it doesn't have to take any mulligans. It starts after 2 shuffles, 3 shuffles, 4 shuffles. It still is well below the mulligan rate for the theoretical limit, and at 5 we slowly reach this limit. So again, 5 riffle shuffles until the mulligan rate has been equalized. And this is a huge advantage for the Mana Weave deck. Taking a mulligan significantly reduces your chance of winning. And the Mana Weave deck just simply does not play on an even playing field. The other big advantage for the Mana Weave deck is flood protection. So how can you check for flooding? Well, there is no way to measure the likelihood of flooding directly, at least currently I cannot think of a way. So we have to look elsewhere. We have to find something that directly correlates with flooding. So what about drawing several lands in a row? The higher the likelihood of drawing several lands in a row, the higher the likelihood of flooding. Well, let's look at the chance of drawing 2 consecutive lands in a row. The hypergeometric calculator gives us the theoretical limit for the properly randomized deck. Drawing 2 consecutive lands out of a 40 card deck is about 15.4%. So again, we draw this theoretical limit here as the black bar. We have the chance of drawing 2 consecutive lands here, and the black bar is at 15.4%. And again, the red bars now indicate the chance of drawing 2 consecutive lands for the Mana Weave deck. By design, as all the lands are evenly spaced out, if you don't shuffle at all, you are never gonna draw 2 lands in a row. That makes perfect sense. But again, up until about 5 riffle shuffles, the Mana Weave deck has a huge advantage over the randomized deck, and basically has a much lower chance of flooding out. So again, we see this magic number, 5 riffle shuffles, until the land rate equalizes. Maybe 2 consecutive lands in a row is not even a good measurement, so I checked 3 consecutive lands in a row as well. The hypergeometric calculator tells us that drawing 3 consecutive lands out of a 40 card deck has a chance of about 5.7%. Again, this is the black line here. And again, we see that the Mana Weave deck approaches this, and after about 5 riffle shuffles, it approaches the theoretical limit of about 5.7%. So these are the numbers that I found. How to summarize? First of all, Mana weaving and pile stacking is not shuffling. I see a lot of discourse online where people simply are not aware of this fact. If you are mana weaving or pile shuffling without properly randomizing your deck afterwards, you are getting an unfair advantage over a properly shuffled deck. And that is even after several riffle shuffles. In my calculations, I saw that 5 riffle shuffles were required to even the odds on mulligans and flooding. So, what can you do? The first thing should be obvious. Just don't mana weave. Just don't pile shuffle. You are just wasting time. After your match or before your match, just take your deck and perform riffle shuffles or mash shuffles. The rules tell you that 6 to 8 riffle shuffles are required. So that's what? 10 seconds? Mana weaving and pile stacking takes a lot longer. If somebody presents a mana weaved or pile stacked deck to you, it depends of course. If you are in a casual setting, you're always allowed to take their deck, shuffle them, or you can ask them to properly randomize their deck. In a tournament setting, you just do what you do in a tournament setting, you call a judge and let them figure it out. From what I understand, they are trained in educating people on the proper randomization of decks, and it will be all above board. Additionally, I wanted to mention some limits of the simulation. I have not really tested for true randomization. I did not really differentiate between individual spells and lands, so each 0 and each 1 is the same. And this is probably where this difference between 5 shuffles and 7 shuffles comes from. Maybe it also has to do something with the number of cards in the deck. This is certainly something that I could look at in the future. And yeah, by the way, I mean, if you have some interesting question that could be answered with this, I'm not guaranteeing anything. This is a heck of a lot of work. But if there are interesting questions, then my curiosity might be piqued and I might be compelled to make a second part to this video. Also, the shuffling, of course, is an algorithm with a certain range of randomness, so it also does not 100% replicate the shuffling in real life. And last but not least, I again want to take the opportunity to thank Sirkowitz. This whole video has given me a new appreciation of what this man does on a weekly basis for all of us. So thank you again for all your work and for helping me with this video as well. Also, I want to say a big thank you to everybody else who contributed to the video by discussing it before it was released. Thank you very much, it is so much appreciated. But after all this grim discussion, I want to leave on a lighter note. I'm going to leave you with the happy thought of the day. If you're getting flooded, don't take it as a sign of not breaking up the land clumps. Take it as a sign of you properly randomizing your deck. And that should make us all feel better about it, I'm sure of it. Thank you for watching.